Peter Katz.
It's nice to see you.
As always, it is very nice to see you as well.
I've been listening to a few of our episodes, just jogging my memory and being like, oh yeah, that conversation and this conversation. It's kind of fun as they're coming out into the world. And I realized that there were certain traditions that I said, or we had said that we were going to establish, and we're very patchy with our traditions. But I'd love to know, Robyne, where are we catching you in time today?
Peter, I also have been listening and also noticed it's like, we don't always quite get through some of those practices, but I still love every minute of this. And today, I'm actually joining you from Toronto en route back to the West Coast for the rest of the week. So today I'm in a hotel in Toronto.
Beautiful. Well, yeah. I am also in Toronto, so I'll be waving at you because we all know Toronto is just a tiny little place. I have 2 trips back and forth to Edmonton this week, which I'm very excited about. So shout out to Edmontonians out there. If you haven't been, it's on the same parallel as Siberia. Fun fact.
I did not know that.
It is.
It feels it sometimes, I think. Yes. Last week, Peter, I was out west and I showed up in Calgary, and I'd been there the week before, and it was beautiful weather. It was +5 and warm. It felt this like tease of spring. And then I flew back to Toronto, and I turned around a couple days later, and I was back out again. And I showed up literally wearing running shoes and a hoodie, and I just happened to have a beanie in my backpack, and it was -40. Wow. And I literally showed up like a teenager. Like everyone was like, where is your coat? Where are your boots? Where are all the things that a grown-ass woman should have with her traveling into a polar vortex? And I actually enjoyed every moment of it. And I actually said to Jax when I got home, I said, I'll never give you a hard time for like wearing Crocs to shovel the driveway again. Like you just do you. Just do you.
Right. Oh.
Yep.
I just pictured the show notes for this episode, and it said, Peter and Robyne talk about the weather. Stay tuned. So,
it's good.
I love that. Last thing I'll say about the weather before we dive into whatever it is we're going to dive into. Like whenever I'm traveling somewhere that I deem is warmer than Canada or warmer than Toronto, then I try to like leave my jacket at home.
Yes.
Like I try to like travel in the clothing that will be appropriate for landing, but it creates problems when certainly when I land back home and I only have shorts and it's Canada. So, all right. Well, I had one topic I was interested in bringing up, but was there anything on your mind that you were present to today, Robyne?
I'm here. I am here, and I'm excited to hear what you're thinking about, Peter.
Okay, well, we were texting the other day, and we didn't really get to dive into it, but the topic was around making big decisions. Ooh. and just sort of what your process is for making big decisions, and maybe there's some research around how we process decisions that might be helpful to people. And I went through my own kind of process with a big decision that I had to make. And I just thought, that's one of those things that so often comes up for people is we have a decision to make, and there's a million opinions out there. There's a lot of competing forces inside of ourselves. And often it's not so much about it being right or wrong, but it's sort of facing the different impacts of whatever decision we make. And so I'm just curious for you, if you have a process around decision making, I'm happy to share mine. And then also, if there's any research or information or sort of how we're wired and why we might struggle with decision making so much.
Yeah, Peter, great topic. So I'm going to reply or reflect in reverse, if that's okay. So what we think about making decisions, I think what's interesting is there's a state that we talk about in psychology that's called cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is that like that messy middle. It's that in between time when we're trying to make a decision. And that can be extremely uncomfortable for a lot of people. And what's interesting is that it just feels like that we're kind of like in that middle where we know we have to make a decision. We are weighing all the pros and cons or positives, or, does this get me closer to my goals? Does this get me farther away from my goals? We're just in that like unknown, or that what we call the meantime. And one of the things we know is that is actually one of the most uncomfortable psychological states, Peter, to be in. It's like in the middle on that trapeze, like it's just in that middle line. And what's fascinating about the human condition is even if we make the right or wrong choice, and I know it's not always like a moral issue of right versus wrong, but as soon as we make a decision, we already feel better. Right? Even if it's not even one that necessarily fits the best for where we're at right now, as soon as we like land on one side or the other, we all of a sudden feel this big sense of relief. So I think just to start that kind of awareness building, that cognitive dissonance, that not knowing, that being on the fence, it is actually a very unpleasant state. And often what happens is we rush through process because we just want to stop feeling that. So it's interesting that it's not that we're like wanting to get to the right answer or what's best for us or that moment. It's literally we jump into things because we just don't want to be on the fence anymore. So I just think that's helpful, just to be kind of aware that this is an emotional state that our bodies don't really like.
That makes so much sense, because I've read a lot about decision fatigue and why you see people like, Steve Jobs always was like black turtleneck. Like, you just wake up, I'm putting on the black turtleneck. And there's, so much of the reading and stuff that I've done is as much sort of decision making that you can put on autopilot. It really kind of keeps your energy better for the rest of the day. And so what you're just presenting there makes a lot of sense in relation to that.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And that kind of familiarity and predictability and routine and habit, whatever you want to call it, it does actually lighten the cognitive load. So we only have so many ideas, thoughts, and that we can carry. And if we're using all of that cognitive load energy to manage things like, what are we going to wear? What do I want for breakfast today? How should I get here? That actually, again, it just drains resources needlessly, where we can actually save it for like the really important stuff. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, any way we can create those rituals, it also gives us that sense of familiarity, which we always feel better when we're in predictable environments.
I was watching an Instagram video of Dan Martell. He's a guy who often shares a lot of wisdom that I appreciate. And he in the video, he's like just walking over and gets into a chest freezer full of ice and takes his ice bath in the morning. But he was just talking about, like, there's no part of him that's like, am I going to do this today? Am I not going to do this today? It's just like, I get up and I do this. And I don't spend a second thinking about, am I going to do this or not? I just get up and I do this. And it was like the simplest thing, but that really hit me. And certainly it's applicable to going to the gym, or like whatever those like good, like the things that we know make us feel good.
Yeah.
Removing the decision-making process part of it, I was really invigorated watching that video. I also think I was sympathetically picturing myself in a chest freezer full of ice. So.
Yeah. And do you know what that reminds me of? I actually was just talking to a group about this, is that so often, just because we have this like thought that pops into our mind, sometimes we take that as a directive. So for example, the thought pops into your mind like, I don't have time to go for a walk today. And then we're just like, oh, I don't have time to do it, versus pausing and just be like, okay, I notice I just had this thought that I don't have time today. But the reality is I do have time. I can make time. I'm going to find time because this aligns with my priorities and my values. So simply because we have the thought, like, I don't know if I'm going to do this today, that doesn't mean we actually have to entertain it, versus recognizing that's not a directive. We have no control of what thoughts pop into our head, like zero control. We get to decide what we do with that thought. So recognizing it as, again, just building that pattern where those directives might pop in, but they're actually not directives. And I'm going to continue to show up. And that also ties in a wee bit, Peter, with this idea about, for some of us, we actually have to do a little bit of relationship repair with ourselves because we've broken a lot of promises to ourselves around things that we're going to do that actually are good for us. And like, so for example, in the morning, maybe you say, you know what, today I'm going to like finish at 2:00 and have like a tender day. And then you push right through it till 5:00. So you almost convinced yourself that, you know, it's okay, we're going to go get this work done, but we're going to have a break earlier because you need time to rest and recover. But then we like keep working into the evening. So our body doesn't really trust ourselves, unfortunately. So the more times that we can actually follow through to ourselves and keep our promises, it actually helps us start to realign that relationship with ourselves.
That hit me significantly. Yeah, that's a powerful thought there, Robyne, and I'm a little bit speechless because I think I just present to the ways that I don't always sort of honor myself, and of course I know the invitation is to be gentle with ourselves, and I think it also gives, you know, anybody who might be listening who sort of feels that resonance as you share that, I think it also gives us somewhere to go. I'll be like, okay, there's some relationship repair I can do with this very important person called me. One other thing I thought of as you were speaking, Robyne, is I forget where I heard this, and maybe you have some research around this as well. But like when you say out loud, like to somebody else, I think I'm going to go for a run today. You're actually less likely to go for the run because you've already gotten the hit of like, oh, I feel good about myself because I told somebody that I'm going to go for a run. It's as if I've already gone for the run, so you're kind of already got the thing that you were hoping for, and so I try to like not say those things out loud and have it be like a little like secret promise to myself. I'm curious if you have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, interesting, Peter. That's actually like a two-sided piece, and you're absolutely right. So if you tell someone like you're working towards, again, a big goal or a little goal, there is research that talks about you already get you get the prize, whether that be dopamine, you get that like positive reinforcement from a colleague or a friend or a loved one that says, good job, Peter, like good for you. So you're already getting the prize or that reward. So yes, there is that component. The second side of it though, because there's always essentially two sides of it, most things, it's this idea that we actually have more accountability when we've actually said it out loud or we've actually made it visible. And that kind of circles back to this idea about like the process and how we like decide things or how we make decisions. I think for us, like for me anyway, the first step and one of these really good learnings that I came upon was the power of making decision processes visible. Because often what happens, we do it in our heads. And as you know, we can think really, really fast and we can get lots of different ideas, thoughts, emotions kind of evoked when we're trying to do things in our mind. Versus when we actually make the process visible and we actually make it external, whether it be whiteboarding or even like free flow writing, like when we get it out and then look at it in front of us, it actually slows down the thinking and we get clarity. So making our thinking visible is like a first step towards making a decision or going through a process.
Yeah, I do love the accountability piece. Like, and so I with a friend of mine, we just messaged each other for a little period of time about just going to the gym or doing
Yeah.
these things that we had committed to each other. And I really did it because we had that little accountability piece. So you're right. There's kind of two sides to everything. I'm curious, Robyne, just whether this is a science-based answer or not, if it could just be like a personal, or combo of both. But do you have a decision-making process, or is there? Yeah, it sounds like you do.
Yeah, I do, Peter. And again, for me, it comes back to asking kind of some key questions about how does this align with my values. And so when we have really good clarity on what our values are and that becomes that moral compass, that emotional compass, that idea-making compass that allows us to make sure that we're staying on the course. So for me, the first question my first question is for me, Peter, is how is this going to impact my family? And so that's kind of a starting point. And some things, it's a quick no, this won't impact them. Okay. Or if it is going to impact them, then I slow right down. And that's when I go to making it visible to figure out how is this going to impact them and what is it that I can do to find a way to reconcile those competing demands of maybe this is something I really want to do and it might impact my family. And if it's going to impact my family, I need to find a way to get them on board, or at least just make sure we can do some expectation setting in terms of what that's going to look like. So that's my first line of kind of questioning, how is this going to impact my family? The second question that I often ask is, how does this align with how I'm essentially trying to live my life? How I'm trying to show up, how I envision myself being. And so again, I start with the family piece because those people are counting on me. And the second is this fitting into that kind of deeper understanding of myself and who I'm trying to become and who I am today?
There's a few things in what you're sharing there, Robyne. So one, it sounds like you have to have done some preliminary work, getting clear around what your values are, and having sort of be deeply in touch with that. I know you and I do presentations sometimes together where we have people go through a little bit of that exercise. The other thing that I'm noticing in about what you're sharing too is you're sort of, I don't know how to word this exactly, but you're not describing sort of going into catastrophizing, you're sort of looking at it from a perspective of not what might go wrong, or you're sort of operating it at the upper level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs there. So how did you find yourself able to get into that state of decision making?
Yeah,
whereas other people might go into panic or go into fight or flight more easily than you were describing.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Peter. And so for me, it's kind of multifaceted. The first is I have learned, right? So this is kind of a learned response that what if things can go right and better than I ever imagined? So I did catastrophizing. I did awfulizing. I was more of an awfulizer than a catastrophizer, where it's just feeling all the awful parts about it. And so moving away from awfulizing, which was my kind of go-to, and catastrophe to me is more external, whereas awfulizing is just this isn't going to work out and I'm not good enough, just all that kind of internal struggle. So I learned that behavior, I recognized it. And then I started to think about, well, what happens if this goes better than I ever could have imagined? And just operating from that place of trust. And the second part of that, Peter, I very wholeheartedly hold this belief that if it's meant for you, it's going to find you. And I'm never going to miss out on something that's meant for me. And I don't worry then about that scarcity of, well, if I don't say yes to this, then what happens if? Because if I'm meant to be there, I believe there'll be a degree of ease with it, at least ease with the decision-making process. If it's meant for me, it'll find me. And that's really how I shifted from moving away from that awfulizing, catastrophizing into that place of, if it's meant for me, it will find me, and trusting that this could very well work out better than I ever dreamed possible.
If it's meant for me, it will find me. I appreciate that. I also, every time you said the word awfulize, I pictured some kind of cute little Ewok type character. So I feel like it's important that I share that information with you. It also made me think of waffles. But the other thing that I
love it.
Well, the other thing that I'm sort of drawing a parallel here is like a lot of the facilitation work that I do and is around appreciative inquiry, and that a lot of times, this is more about sort of problem solving than it is so much about decision making. But I think that there is a nice overlap in that the typical approach to kind of problem solving is we start from this deficit place, right? Oh, we have a problem. And then it's like, okay, whose fault is it and what went wrong? And we need to fix this problem. And best case scenario, we find ourselves back at neutral. Yeah. Whereas, sort of you're describing, like, what if everything went incredibly well, or this kind of inspiring vision of the future. Appreciative inquiry would say this lens of possibility. Yeah. And so, and then when you're imagining not just having a problem fixed, but actually a state where things are even better than one could have imagined, that puts us into a place of, well, how might we get there? Or it puts us into a place where we're generative instead of sort of looking through that negative lens. And so anyway, I just kind of drew that parallel there. And it's not about ignoring problems. Like, appreciative inquiry is not about ignoring things, but it's really about the inquiry, and asking ourselves, okay, well, what might a future vision look like that where this actually goes even better than I could have imagined? And then you start asking yourself questions like, oh, well, how might I get there? What might that look like? Who might I need to enroll in order to find myself there versus who do I need to fire?
Peter, that's an amazing connection, and I see that clearly as well. I'm also holding space for the Ewok eating waffles, awfulizing. I feel like that's this little visual character we could create. I want to befriend them. I want to befriend that little creature eating waffles, thinking about the world going to hell in a handbasket. That kind of part of our thinking that sometimes goes so off course. The piece what you just said about, I want to jump to about not ignoring what could go wrong or not ignoring the negative. One of the truths, Peter, that I have come upon is I spent a lot of energy for a very long time in that place of worrying and that place of anxiety. And I can share with you and the folks who are listening, the worst things that I've ever navigated in my life, I didn't see them coming. I didn't worry about them ahead of time. And I realized in that moment, after I noticed, like when I got hit kind of by this third major trauma in my life, that all of the worrying I was doing, trying to keep myself safe, actually never saved me or protected me from the stuff that that did bring me to my knees. So if worrying is an action that we do to try and keep ourselves safe, but then the reality is it didn't actually work because life still caught up to me and stuff still happened in my world that, again, was so difficult to navigate. That kind of almost to me gave me this permission to just let go of the worry and the anxiety, because it's not going to stop the stuff that takes us out at the knees.
Right. I just picture someone being like, oh, I'm going to worry about the things I can't predict.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing, right? And that's but if we just again slow down sometimes, if we just pause sometimes and realize 99% of the stuff we've worried about probably never even happened. And you could look at that two ways. Well, maybe the worrying worked and it didn't happen, or this is a different place where, maybe we don't have to get into those negative thinking patterns as often as we find ourselves in. And I could share with you a wee little strategy that we use to help persons who are worrying and doing quite a bit of anxiety is actually to set a timer and give yourself permission to essentially worry yourself for as long as you possibly can about everything that can go wrong in this predetermined time set. So set an alarm on your phone and say, okay, I'm going to give this 8 minutes of full throttle, complete freak out worry, and literally just let your brain kind of go into that creative place, think about all of the horrible, no good, rotten things that could possibly happen. And what's so remarkable about that action, Peter, we can't stay in a state of constant worrying because eventually we're going to get bored. Like eventually we're going to like catastrophize or awfulize to the point where it's like, okay, Armageddon. Game over, right? Like we can't actually stay in that state. But what's remarkable is if we peppered worry throughout an entire day of consciousness, we can worry for way more than 8 minutes. Like it could literally be this narrative or this theme soundtrack in the background all day. But if we single task or multitask worry, we get bored pretty quick.
I have no idea if this is a parallel that makes sense, but you're making me think of the idea of like a cheat day when you're on a diet or something, you know, or not on a diet, like just like you're trying to like generally live a healthy lifestyle, but you're like, okay, this meal, here I go.
Yeah.
But you're better off to have the consistency the rest of the time and have that one deviation than to just, you know, pepper the waffles, you know, every. Dessert waffles every meal. So I appreciate that.
But just to really kind of drive that out, because again, this is one of those big learnings I wish more people can hear, Peter, is that when we often multitask worry, we multitask anxiety. It's like I'm doing something and I'm also mildly freaking out in the background. And my gentle invitation though is when we actually start monotasking some of those feelings and actually just giving it our full attention, it isn't as like, it doesn't hold us as tightly as we think it does. But again, if we just let, again, we talk about this a wee bit as like the discipline of the mind. If we just let our mind run ragged, like just let it run wild, it can really pull us down as that background narrative. So the idea is to actually monotask those big feelings, give it the attention it needs, hold space for it, versus just having that as a soundtrack throughout your life.
Love that. Before we get to our questions here in our few minutes left, I just thought I'd share a little bit of my relationship with decision making.
Yes, please.
I've mentioned this many times. I work with an amazing mindfulness coach, and one of the things that she's really helped me to do, and I think this is applicable to people that might be listening, is also just trusting our own process and not being so hard on ourselves for the way that we might go through some of our decision making, and maybe we're not able to jump to our values right away, like that's something that we can work towards. But for me, the way that I've learned that I process things is I need a moment where I really, two things. One, I need a moment where I really like sort of look at things. So I had this big decision to make, and there was financial considerations, and I just pulled up an Excel file and I wrote out like, okay, this is all the money that's coming in for the next 4 months. This is all the money that's going out the door. This is the buffer for things to go wrong. This is like, I got to make sure there's savings, like all these other things that I want to stay consistent. And I literally ran all the numbers, and I just looked at the number at the end, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm not going to do that thing. And there's all kinds of like criticism that comes up in my own brain as soon, like that could come up in my brain of like, oh, well, we live in abundance and we need to take risks. I take plenty of risks in my life. And in that moment, I was like, I'm just going to feel, this is like, by running the numbers and just looking at it so plainly in front of me, it helped kind of de-emotionalize it for me. And I was able to just make a decision and feel good about it. Feeling like I had been thoughtful, I had looked at all the variables, and I had, and just, anyway, that was something I wanted to share. And the other thing that, and this has been around like big decisions in my life. I'm actually thinking around like my divorce, which was 7 or 8 years ago now. But part of the decision making was, it was really one of those both and situations where the question was like, do I stay in this relationship? And the answer was that I needed to feel like I had fully tried. Like there was nothing, there was no stone left unturned. Maybe not everybody needs to get to that point, but for me, the thing that allowed me to powerfully choose to leave was knowing that I had powerfully chosen to stay.
Yes.
And so there's that. Sometimes we need to allow ourselves to maybe do the thing we're like, okay, well, maybe this isn't totally great for me, or I'm in that conflict state, but this is such a big decision that I need to kind of be in both states, and then I'll know when it's time to leave. Like in this relationship course I'm doing with Terry Real right now, somebody asked him, like, how do you're all therapists here, and it's like, you would think that every therapist says every relationship is salvageable, right? It's good for paying their bills, right? If you just keep working on your relationship forever. But he said, well, this is how you know when it's time to leave. He said, when the pain of staying is greater than the pain of leaving, then you know it's time. And I appreciated that as well, this idea that sometimes we need to fully live in one side of the decision before we can powerfully choose the next. So just thought I'd share those two little pieces.
Oh, Peter, they're so powerful. They're so powerful. And again, it's that clarity. That's the thing I see in both of the examples that you shared. It's needing the clarity and like quieting the mental noise, holding space for both. And I can share with you, as somebody who's also navigated relationship conflict, I remember somebody telling me, well, you need to stay in this marriage for the sake of your kids. And I remember saying, actually, I'm leaving for the sake of my kids.
Right.
Because they need better than this, and this isn't what's best for them. And so again, in that place where I knew in my heart that I'm leaving for the sake of these three kids. And again, it's just that when you have the clarity and that commitment to yourself, that what makes sense to you, I feel like that's when we can get that ease. And again, I am using ease as a barometer more than I ever did before, because it allows me to recognize, like, yeah, it's going to be hard. And if I can find that ease of just trusting that I don't have to convince myself, or I don't have to try and justify it, that there's ease in my own confidence with my choices, I find that's how at the end of the day, you're going in the right direction.
Beautiful. Well, Robyne, we're 2 minutes over here. Should we do a lightning round question, or should we just be negligent with our traditions? That's totally fine.
Well, we could do both, but I have a lightning round question, and it's inspired, actually, if I could ask you, based on my clothing choice. So I just happened to be wearing a Peter Katz t-shirt today, which brought me deep joy to jump on a podcast wearing Peter's merch. And I was curious, Peter, like, I want to hear what concert t-shirt that you somehow have in your world. What concert t-shirt's your shirt?
Well, so when I was, I have many concert t-shirts, but the one that comes to mind is, yes, that question is, when I was a teenager, my favorite band was the Smashing Pumpkins.
Oh.
And Billy Corgan, who's the lead singer of Smashing Pumpkins, had this long sleeve shirt that he would wear as a black shirt, and it said 0 on it. And I think I wore that shirt every day of high school for a period of time. Like I wore that, and I wore pajama pants and that shirt. That was my outfit.
Your fit. I love that. That's your fit. That's so good.
Yeah. So that shirt. And as we get rid of clothing and stuff in our lives, there's certain pieces that we just hold on to no matter what. And I'm sure that shirt is somewhere in the archive of my clothing pile.
Peter, I love that. And I love that that's like the shirt that like represents your high school season, or a piece of your high school season. I laughed. Yeah. I laughed a wee while ago. I was at a basketball game with Hunter, and at the time he had a lady friend that they were hanging out, and he was wearing a shirt that he got in grade 9, and now he's in like bonus year of grade 12, and he still wears the shirt, and it says "basketball is my girlfriend," but he like wears it next to like lady friends, which I always find like is actually like mildly, I think it's funny. I don't know if other people find it joy, but his definite, like his high school t-shirt would definitely be the Nike basketball is my girlfriend shirt, that it's like almost like it looks like I'm sure there's holes in it at this point, but he still pulls that out. And it brings me joy that you have that shirt from the Smashing Pumpkins. And I just made me think of Hunter and his basketball is my girlfriend t-shirt.
I think what's actually happening there is Hunter is much smarter than I realize, and he's playing hard to get psychology there, because then the lady friends are like, oh really, right? And now all of a sudden there's a challenge.
Challenge. Oh, I love it.
Exactly.
Oh well, my friend, thank you for talking to me and with me today. I hope listeners have enjoyed this wee little conversation, and thank you for making time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Robyne. I'll save my question for you for next time. So thanks, everybody, and see you soon.